Hello and welcome to Secrets Mystery Manor. I'm your host, Psychic Zelda Kelly. Hello everyone, this is Zelda Kelly with Secrets Mystery Manor. Welcome, welcome. Have I got a funny little tale to tell you? It's kind of creepy in some ways, and you kind of want to, I guess, raise your eyebrow in other ways. But this is fun. I think it's fun because it's paranormal fun. But first, I would like to thank Psychic Secrets for giving us this platform and allowing me to bring these great little tales of the paranormal and ghosts and oddities to you. So with no further, delay, let's bring this story to you. So this is called the Ghostbuster House. And then we're going to dive a little deeper and tell you what happened to the Ghostbuster House. So in the early 1960s, there was the family of Helen Ackley that moved into Nyack, New York. They moved into this house that needed, a lot of repair. There were a lot of problems with this house. And many people warned the Ackleys that this was haunted. Don't move in. And that there had been some paranormal incidents, but nothing had been published. Helen Ackley, who was, I'm going to say, the matriarch of the family, claimed that there were 3 ghosts in this home that they bought. And while they were doing the repairs and renovations, she described how she found these 3 spirits. 2 of them were a married couple, and they had lived in the 18th century. And the other one was an American Revolution Navy lieutenant. That's an odd triangle to be there, isn't it? Okay, so anyway, so she was contacted, Helen Ackley, in 1993 by a paranormal researcher, Bill Merrill, and a medium, Glenn Johnson. They claimed that they had already made contacts with the spirits of one La Vida place. That was the address of this place in Nyack, New York. The pair met with Helen and told her that the couple of poltergeists of Sir George and Lady Margaret, and these 2 had lived in this area in New York during the 18th century. So then in 1995, Merrill and Johnson took their book, they wrote a book, I guess it was sanctioned by Helen, and they published their findings entitled, now this book is still available on Amazon. I looked for it. Pretty interesting. The name of the book is Sir George, the Ghost of Nyack. Now this is published by Deer Publishing, Beaverton, Oregon. So you might want to check that out. But Helen, during her stay there, she claimed that she had actually seen Sir George and said that she was sitting in a rocking chair and saw him mid-air in the living room. And then there was an 8-foot stepladder, and she asked him if they could do the renovations to the house, and evidently he agreed. Isn't that nice? So if you live in a haunted house, you may have to go in and ask if it's okay to do renovations. And while that's kind of tongue-in-cheek, many times I've lived in haunted houses, and you can go back through the mystery manors if you're curious about this. I lived growing up in a farmhouse in Ohio that was an underground railroad for slaves coming from the south into the north. And boy, did my family and I have a lot of activity regarding that. That was very interesting. But the one thing that my mother did, because my family, other than my dad, and my grandparents were always very aware of the paranormal, the psychic unknown, and they believed in grounding themselves when going into a house. When you go in and renovate it, I always, when I'm investigating different homes, I ground myself. How do I do that? Well, in the summertime, I might even walk through a yard if there is a yard. And of course, if it doesn't have anything sharp in it, like nails or construction materials or anything else like that, I like to really kind of walk through the yard a little bit barefooted. Or if the weather is a little bit not so nice and cooperative, I will walk on the front porch or into the front door, and I will, with my right hand, because that's my power hand, I will put my hand on the door frame, if it's wood, and ground myself before you go in. That equates to, if you have an electrical plug and you see the grounding part of the electrical plug, that's pretty much it. Anytime my parents, who we bought different farmhouses in Ohio and renovated, my mother and grandmother would go in and say, okay, now we're getting ready to renovate this home. We know that this was your home and we don't want to disturb you, but it really does need to be cleaned up and it really needs to be updated. And we need to do a little work here. So if you don't mind, we would like to come in peacefully and do this. Now, this was really something that they did. My grandparents did the same thing. Even though they built a new house, they would go on it because the land up in this region of Ohio had a lot of different things going on. So I didn't mean to take a little sidestep there, but I wanted to really let you know that this is not an uncommon practice to ask, I'm going to say, the paranormal permission. Okay, so back to the story in Helen. Helen had reported that the neighbors even heard footsteps that weren't there, and the neighbors would hear slamming doors. Evidently, this was close to neighbors in a neighborhood, this home. I wouldn't want to be that close that a neighbor could hear a slamming door, but okay, back to the story, right? I know you're thinking the same thing. Helen's grandchildren reported, or Helen reported, that her grandchildren received little gifts like rings or little pieces of paper. One received a little trinket box, but then these gifts would just disappear to nowhere. They would look for them and they couldn't find them. Helen also claimed that her son was just walking through the house one day, came around the corner, went into a room, and came face to face with this revolutionary officer, this Navy lieutenant officer. That probably would have been pretty startling, huh? Well, Helen's daughter, whose name was Cynthia, said that many times in the morning she would be shaken, or her bed would shake to get her up. And then I guess when Cynthia was out of school for the summer, she would go to bed every night and say, I'm not going to school in the morning, so if you don't mind, please don't shake me to wake me. Wow. And you know what? She reported that they didn't. That was pretty benevolent with them, wasn't it? That was nice. Very good. So they would allow her to sleep in and not shake her bed. Mark Kavanaugh lived in the home in later years because he was engaged to Cynthia, Helen's daughter, and said that he would hear conversations from a vacant room. Or he would say that Cynthia, and he called her Cyn, C-Y-N, would fall asleep and he would hear the bedroom door open, or there would be knocks on her bed or something else, and he would actually feel, once she fell asleep, a depression in the bed where they were, as if someone was sitting in the bed with them. And not only that, they would both feel that there was a spirit holding them down. And Mark Kavanaugh, the fiance of Cynthia, would say that he just couldn't move, that it was frightening, terribly frightening. So all of these little accounts by Mark Kavanaugh and Helen were they were basically writing these things down. And I hesitated there because I didn't want to say it, but I'm going to say it. I think obviously it was for profit, because obviously it was. It went to the Reader's Digest thing, and it went to the Reader's Digest thing. I mean, this little magazine that used to come out in the 1970s. And in May of 1977 was the first publication of this. So they really wrote some very unnerving things, and there were a lot more than what I've told you. But Mark said that he thought that the ghosts were evaluating him to see if he was good enough to marry Cynthia. Wow. So the Ackleys wanted to move in 1990, and they wanted to sell the house. So this is where it gets interesting. So they were selling the house, and local newspapers were writing about these now paranormal sightings and paranormal things. And what they would do is they would have people that were guests, tourists, come and tour the home to see this haunted house. And this was going on now after the Reader Digest was published from 1977 to 1989. They were on a 5-house walk-around tour. I know you've heard about those things. They're all over the United States in different cities, but they were on a tour. And there were several instances where the press and so forth would come out, and basically these spirits, ghosts, and poltergeists would interact with her and her family, and people would want to be there to see it. So Mrs. Ackley, Helen Ackley's real estate broker, okay, she put it up for sale. She put the house up for sale. She was with Ellis Realty, told Ellis Realty that the home was haunted. She disclosed everything. And there was a buyer, Jeffrey Stembovsky, and before he entered into the contract in 1989 or 1990, I think it was closer to 1990, he signed a contract and gave Helen a $32,500 down payment on the price of $650,000. Now, in 1990, I think that's a pretty hefty price for this house. I think you probably would too. So Helen Ackley did not sign the contract until she knew that the house, it was disclosed to this man, Mr. Jeffrey Stembovsky. It was disclosed that it was haunted, and she made sure that her real estate office disclosed it to him and said she was not going to sign until that happened. So the broker actually called this buyer and said, "This house is haunted. This house is haunted." And he laughed and said, "Well, we'll have to call in Ghostbusters." So that's where this house got the name, the Ghostbusters House. So after a time, they said, well, obviously because the Ghostbusters movie was out, so they were doing a little tongue-in-cheek thing about it. So the real estate broker advised Helen Ackley that all is well. It was disclosed, and she signed her contract, and they were waiting for the closing. But the broker and the seller, well, the seller was sued by Mr. Stembovsky because he said he was not aware of the folklore of Nyack, New York, and he wanted out of the contract. Even though the contract was fully signed, and even though he decided that it was okay and he was making light of the Ghostbuster house, he did not take her seriously. So both parties said that it had been disclosed, but he just thought that it was a passionate story told by Helen and that she was maybe off a little bit and he didn't take her seriously and he wanted out of the contract. So he filed an action to actually, it was called a rescission. He wanted a rescission in the contract, and he wanted damages for fraudulent misrepresentation from Helen and from Ellis Realty. And they didn't even close. So Stambovsky didn't go to the closing, and it caused him to actually force the down payment or forfeit the down payment of the $32,500. What a mess. What a mess over a haunted house. What a mess. So he said he was then not obligated to buy the house. The New York Supreme Court got involved. And the Supreme Court dismissed the action. They said this is a bunch of hooey. And I got to read this to you because it's kind of funny. They basically put in here, in the first opinion, and imagine this going in front of the Supreme Court of New York, where they have to decide if a home is actually haunted and if someone is eligible for damages and fraudulent misrepresentation. That's pretty wild. So they're saying that because of the 1984 Ghostbusters movie and because even of Shakespeare's Hamlet, some of the opinion in the legal precedent was written as, and here I'm going to quote, "The plaintiff hasn't a ghost of a chance," unquote. Another quote is, "I am moved by the spirit of equity," unquote. Another quote is, "The notion is a hobgoblin which should be exorcised from the body of legal precedent," unquote. So Mr. Stambovsky didn't stop there. He basically took this and he appealed to the New York Supreme Court, and basically he won the appeal. He did not get any fraudulent misrepresentation damages or any of these things. He was just really allowed to walk away from the property. But the funny part of it is, this whole thing now has made case history in the New York Supreme Court. And to this day, it is still a law on the books. And it basically says that it is called the Ghostbuster Ruling and protects people if it is disclosed or not disclosed if a house is haunted. Now, the court said they can't determine whether the house is haunted or not. However, if someone says it is, then who is the court to say that it isn't? Isn't that funny? I wanted to bring that to you today because, I think the funniest part of this is, as time went on, and let me just really describe this house a little bit to you. It was built in 1890, and it has 5 bedrooms and 3.5 bathrooms, and is approximately 4,628 square feet. The Ackleys, George, and Helen bought the home in the early 1960s, and then eventually they shared the home with all 4 children and with Mark Kavanaugh, the fiancé of Cynthia. George, the husband, died in a hospital after a heart surgery in 1978. He was 53 years old. And they said it was less than a year after is when all this paranormal activity started. And that's what they put into the Reader's Digest. Though he did not die in the home, there was someone who actually did die. And it was a dinner guest who was in great health and was young and died of a brain aneurysm at the dinner table. So by 1990, the residents of the home in Nyack, New York, were Helen's grandchildren, the daughter-in-law, and future son-in-law of Mark Kavanaugh. The last thing is the Ghostbusters home sold on January 8th of 2016. Now get this. For more than $600,000 above the comparable homes in Nyack, according to Trulia and Realtor.com. And they got, are you ready? To me, this is scarier than the story. They got $1.77 million for this house because of the popularity of the paranormal, because it made case history in New York, and it made the newspapers. And it made a lot of other articles in many other different magazines and a few little news spots. So whoever got that house was that they were buying the famous house. Whoever bought it changed the exterior from red, and now it is painted a light blue. But over the years, they have had 25 to 50 people per month go to this home and want to buy it. So I guess it pays to be paranormal, right? So I guess in conclusion of bringing you the story, which I think is kind of funny and different, maybe you've never heard of it before, but the next time you go in to buy a house and someone tells you that it's haunted, you may not want to call Ghostbusters. You may want to call your lawyer instead. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Secrets Mystery Manor. I really enjoyed bringing this one to you. We're going to bring a scary one to you next time. So next Friday, hang in there and listen. Thanks so much for being here. I had a great time. Hope you did too. So I will be back very soon for the next one. Meantime, thanks again for Psychic Secrets, and I'll see you again next time. Have a good weekend. Bye for now. Until next time, thanks so much for listening. I just love this, don't you?